All right, you guys. So we're going to get started. Today we have Sam. If you were here this morning when we talked about trends that are going on in the industry, Sam is also with Karthauser and Sons, which all these great products that you're going to see here. So thank you for sponsoring us for this event. And he is going to talk about mastering the care and handling of green plants. So let's welcome Sam Rosenthal.
All right, can you hear me? Good. All right, thank you for coming, everybody. This is not going to be a typical design stage show. I've gotten a lot of questions about customers saying, how do I take care of green plants? And I would carry more plants if I knew how to take care of them, but I kill everything I touch. So today we're going to talk about that, all right? So, all right, let's go to this. There's not going to be many goofy transitions like that, okay? So before you know how to take care of them, the question would be, why would you stock green plants? There's a lot of customers, all different types of people, do different things, but some people just bring them in for funerals, and they don't want to take care of them because it's intimidating, and I just want to, I have a funeral, give me 2 8-inch spath, and then they go out the door, and I don't have to think about it, okay? So we're going to talk about reasons, business reasons why you'd want to stock green plants, and then we'll talk about how to take care of them. All right. The first thing is to widen your customer base. You get the funeral work, that's good, and then you send the spath out, but people don't know you as someone where they could go to get plants. So if they come into your shop and they see that you have lots of cool plants that they've never seen or just really healthy looking plants, you might get repeat customers and you'll open another avenue for revenue for being a green plant person. So that's a really good reason. Another reason is they have higher perceived value than cut flowers. So people think flowers are beautiful, but plants last longer. So in the consumer's eyes, it's more of an investment. Improve margins by selling the whole package. So you sell the plants, you sell the fertilizer, you sell the containers, you sell the saucers, you sell the top dressing. And so you make more money by offering the whole thing. That also, that's how they start to go to you as the person, because they see, oh, she has everything I need, and I'll just get all there. So that's good. Smoothing out seasonal spikes. If you become the person that people go to for everyday kind of plant things, it's not really tied to a holiday. It's just, it could be consistent business throughout the year. That could help with, seasonality, and we all know how that works. It's crazy. So that's another reason. And the biggest reason is vibes. So when I've walked into a lot of different stores and to talk to customers that I've either sold to already or have never met before and I want to sell to. And when I walk into their store, the first thing I see is I try and get a sense of what are they trying to, what's their brand? What are they trying to show to the people that walk in their store? And there's a big difference to me when I walk into a store that has healthy plants all over the place, or when I walk into a store that doesn't, or has a couple spath and a couple dish gardens, and it just looks not bare, but because it could be full of other things, but the plants bring this sense of kind of like, I'm going into a place and I know that there's expertise there. I know that there's, if you're good with your plants, you're probably really good with your cut flowers. If you know how to take care of this, you know how to take care of cutting this off and taking care of it. So to me, it always kind of triggers okay, this person kind of knows what they're doing when I walk into their store. So for your customers, especially the customers that walk in saying, I kill everything and this person doesn't, they must be some kind of magician, that could, help a lot with just your reputation. All right, so that's the last goofy animation we're going to do. Okay, so before you know how to take care of plants, you need to know what plants do. And when you know what plants do, you'll know how to take care of them. So everybody has probably known that plants photosynthesize, okay? But what is photosynthesis? It's amazing and it's worth taking the time to actually think about it, okay? So plants take in carbon dioxide and water, and they make glucose. So they take in basically bad air and water, and they make candy out of it. That's pretty insane, and they make oxygen. So that's pretty amazing. If you think about just air and water coming together and making sugar, that's the reason that life on this planet exists. It's the reason that the environment became habitable, is because it got rid of all the CO2 and it made a bunch of oxygen, and animals could start breathing and evolving and living. So it's really amazing what they do. Now, when we're looking at how to take care of any plant, we can look at this and get a really good idea. They need water, okay? The sunlight powers the reaction. So that's obviously important, and we kind of know that. And then CO2. CO2 is not something you're going to need to supplement a lot. There are some instances where that's necessary, but in a floral shop, you're not going to have to worry about it. We're talking about just more high intense growing conditions with specific varieties, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so, all right. This is a general pyramid of what plants need based on level of importance. So the number one thing that they need to do everything is light. That's the most important thing where people make mistakes. The reason that's the most important thing is because, yeah, they need all that other stuff, but light is what makes the reaction happen. So it doesn't matter how much water you have, how much anything else. If there's no light, it's not going to do its thing. Water is the next most important. It's obviously important. We'll go over that. And you saw in photosynthesis, it's needed to make the sugar, which they grow with. Soil structure. Okay, this one is, you normally wouldn't, if you were to ask somebody, what do you think the most important things are? Soil structure would not probably be high on their list, but it is extremely important. We'll talk about why later, but it's after water, very important. Nutrients, fertilizer, stuff like that, very important. Pretty easy, actually, when we get to that. It's very easy to fertilize these plants, but most people don't. They'll get a plant, they'll take it home, and they just think water and light, water and light. And so they put it in a place that they think has good light, and they give it what they think is the right amount of water, and then they just let it sit there, and then it does okay, maybe, and then it starts to decline, and they don't know why. Usually 3 and 4 of the reasons that they don't know why it's declining is soil structure, and they don't fertilize it because they don't think they have to. Temperature and humidity are both very important, pretty easy to handle, so we'll get to those in a second. All right, we're going to talk about light first since it's at the bottom of the pyramid, and we're going to talk with natural lighting first. All right, so you have light that comes from the north, east, south, and west, okay? So let's just talk about those kinds of light and the advantages that they give you. So east light, okay, that's where the sun rises in the east, okay? So as the sun rises, it's going to be coming in your window very horizontally. So that's good. It's going to give you a wide angle. It's going to penetrate farther into the room. So that's important. You can have plants further back from the window. It's considered bright light, and we'll talk about all these terms for bright and indirect and direct and what that actually means, because that's very vague. So it's bright light, it's good light. It's medium light. Medium light is pretty good. Partial sun, so you'll get some sun, but then it goes away, which is really important because some plants can't handle, most of these plants can't handle being in the sun all day long. Here's some example plants that would do well here. Ferns, begonias, prayer plants, aglaonemas. These things don't need to be blasted all day long, and they could get damaged from getting blasted all day long. All right, west, same idea, but on the other side. So it's angled, comes in, it can fill a large space. It's bright, and it's harsher than east because it's more intense in the afternoon sun versus the morning sun. It's very similar in some ways, mostly medium, but it can support higher light plants. Still partial sun. Most plants grow in this area, and if you have really high light plants, we'll talk about, but that would be like succulents, cactus, things like that. Those will do okay here, but they want to be close, okay, to the window or the source. South. All right, everybody knows, hopefully, maybe not, that the sun is always in the south in the sky, right? So the southern side of any building is getting all of the sunlight all day long, unless it's raining. So a couple things. Now, it's not where the sun rises and sets, so it's not angled, it's more directly down, which means it's not going to penetrate as far into the room, so you got to keep that in mind. It will be when the sun is lower in the sky in winter, you will get more angling, but in the summer, when it's really high in the sky, it's going to be hitting like the front of the window. It's very intense. It's what people would call, or if a plant is labeled full sun, this is what they're talking about. And some example plants would be cacti, succulents, crotons, ficus, and variegated stuff. Variegated plants, so a plant photosynthesizes with chlorophyll from light, right? And it's what turns this green, okay? Variegated plants don't have so much green, okay? So the only part of this plant that's photosynthesizing, that's taking water and carbon dioxide and turning it into sugar, is the green part. The white is not doing that, okay? So because of that, the plant needs to get a lot of sun to hit the smaller green part so that it can make enough sugar. If it does not get enough sun, the new growth will start coming in more green because it has to compensate for that. So if you want to keep the variegation in a plant and keep it nice and white and have that variegated effect, it has to be getting high sun or it will start to revert to green. okay? And finally, we have north. Okay, so there is no sun in the north. It doesn't happen. So you still get light, especially if you can see the sky. It's really good to know if your plants can see the sky or not, because they're still getting light in there. So it's not getting any direct sun. It's what you would consider a low light plant would do, but it might not even be good for those. And we're going to talk about measuring light in 1 second. But some good plants are just general easy plants. Aspidistra, philodendrons, ZZs, pothos should do okay there. All right. Now, if you're talking about supplementing light in a section that, say, in the north, and you want to have plants there, but you need supplemental light, we have to look at the quality of the light. So you're going to be using mostly LEDs. In the past, there was lots of ways to, there's incandescent, all these different types of bulbs that are really inefficient. They produce a lot of heat, and they're very expensive to run. So I would not consider anything that's not an LED. They're very affordable. Your energy bill is going to be really low, and just don't go anywhere else. They last forever. Okay, so this is the electromagnetic spectrum, all right? So all these things are on there. In the middle of the, depending on how close the waves are together, is what we perceive as visible light, okay? But on the spectrum, it goes all the way through microwaves, radio waves, gamma rays. All of these things are the same waves, just different sizes, okay? So if you look in the center there, plants see a certain light, and our eyes are tuned to see certain wavelengths also. So plants really like red light and blue light, the opposite ends of a spectrum, okay? They use those things mostly for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, it powers photosynthesis, but the red light is kind of what makes them grow tall, and the blue light is what makes them stay short and stocky and bloom, okay? So for example, if you give a plant only red light, it's going to get really leggy and tall, and it's not going to be nice and full, and it's not going to probably bloom as well, or if it does bloom, they're going to be really weird-looking flowers. So that's that. So it needs both. So if you look at, so anytime, let's say this plant, reflects a color at us that we see, that means that that's the wave that it's bouncing back. It's not accepting, okay? Every other, it's still getting all that light, the blue all the way through the red, but it's absorbing it and it's going into it, okay? So whatever color you see something as is the light that it's rejecting and reflecting back at you. So it absorbs the red, and this is just kind of an interesting thing. So how would a plant grow? Most of these plants grow in forests, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but they grow underneath a canopy of trees. So how do they get light? Well, one thing that's cool about plants is red light. There's red light and there's far red light, and red light gets absorbed and photosynthesizes at the top. Far red light will penetrate through, and the plant below it will get just far red light, which is just all the way at the end of the spectrum. And when it gets that, it knows that I'm being blocked out and I need to grow taller. So depending on what kind of light the plant is getting, they will change their behavior because that's how they know where they are and how they need to survive. So that's kind of something we'll talk about in a bit. Also, what's interesting is that human vision, if you look, it's basically the inverse of what plants see. Okay, so we see the part that they don't really need. And we see green really well, and this just has to do with our ancestors millions of years ago looking for food. And so they'd see plants and they would go to the plants. So this relationship evolved over millions and millions of years to be this way. And that's why we eat plants and we need each other. So, all right. Okay, now how do we, instead of just saying, oh, it's kind of bright, it's kind of not bright, how do we actually measure if we want an actual reading for what level of light we have? So we're going to use this thing here. This is called a light meter, okay? There's actually apps you can get on your phone that do a pretty good job of this. All it does is it absorbs light here, and it tells you what intensity the light is. Now, it's very cheap. This is probably like $15. Oop, okay. All right, so these are the common terms that you're going to hear when you read a care tag. It's going to say full sun, partial sun, shade, bright, indirect, whatever that means. Low light, no light. That doesn't tell you anything. That's irrelevant. Like, if I asked all you what bright and direct means, you give me totally different answers. So this is what this does. It makes it more accurate, okay? So it's misleading. You tell a customer this needs bright and direct, they're going to put it in their southern-facing window, and it's going to be dead in a week, okay? And they're going to be confused. Why did this person not tell me? Or they'll assume I did everything right. I put it in the sun. It's bright. And they sold me a bad plant, things like that. So, more accurate. Okay. This thing measures light in a unit that's called foot candles, okay? So a foot candle is the light that one candle produces on a 1 square foot surface from 1 foot away. It's totally arbitrary, but it standardizes everything so where we can at least talk about the same number that makes sense. So that's what it would measure it in. Okay, so this is how you would convert the common inaccurate terms into foot candles. And if you want, Stephanie, I'll send you the whole thing after this. There's a lot of lists on here. If anybody wants a copy of this, you could just use it. But take pictures too. All right, so if something says no light, okay, it means less than 100 foot candles. So let's see what the light is right where I'm standing. Okay, so 460, 430, 460. Let me just see one thing. There's a different, oh, okay, sorry. So the light I'm getting right now is 40, 43. Okay, and the thing too is we don't know, these lights probably won't keep any plants alive. That's way underneath what would keep a plant alive. So no plant would live here for long, and even if it was bright enough, we don't know that the spectrum of light is correct to what they need to survive anyway. So probably not gonna work. There is a no light fallacy that I should talk about. There are a lot of plants that people say, oh, this plant does really well in low light, or this plant does really well in no light. That does not exist. There is no plant that does well in low light or no light. What it does is it dies really slowly over time, and it doesn't grow, and it looks nice while it's dying. Okay, there's no plant that does well in low light. So if they tell you that your snake plant does really well in low light, actually they kind of do, but whatever. Like, let's say a pothos. They'll just live longer, but they'll die eventually. So a pothos, this guy here would do really well in no light. Wow, it looks amazing, and it seems to be fine, but it will eventually die. It's just dying gracefully. Okay, it's falling with style. Like it's not going to live. So then we go into the low light territory, and this is where you can actually start to plan where you're going to put plants and actually keep them alive. Okay, low light is between 200 and 400. That's still very low because if you look at full sun, it's 8,000. But low light is really good. Now, when you get to low light and above, the plant is going to actually start growing because it's going to start photosynthesizing. Okay, so when you look at low light 200 to 400 versus bright and direct, which is 400 to 800, I personally, at a flower shop, I would want to keep plants alive, but you want to keep them growing slowly or moderately. You don't want them to grow really fast. The number one reason is because the biggest downside of having a lot of plants is you have to do a lot of maintenance with the plants, and if you can reduce the amount of time it takes you to take care of the plants, then you're not wasting money and it's worthwhile to keep them there, right? So if you keep them at 200 to 400, they're still gonna grow, but it's gonna be slow. The other thing is, the more light they get, the more photosynthesis they do, the more of the inputs for photosynthesis they need, which means water. So the more light they get, the more growing, the more you're gonna have to water them. They're gonna dry out faster. They might go down if you miss one. So you wanna keep them growing very slowly while they're in your shop, okay? Bright and direct, now if you want plants if you want them to grow a little faster in the shop, you can bump them up to bright and direct, okay? And you'll start to see pothos, like a customer, if they come in one day, they come in a month later, they'll see a significant difference in the pothos and in the different things like that. That's totally fine. It still makes watering manageable, but it will grow faster, and when it grows faster, it needs to be tended to more often. So keep that in mind. Shade, look at that. Is that shocking? Shade is higher than bright and direct light? What does that mean? Okay, well, what that means is kind of like when you have a plant that's in shade, we'll take the pothos again, this is an easy one to beat up on. Pothos grow in a jungle, okay? They're vining plants, and the reason they vine is because they grow in shade, and they're trying to they either grow in a canopy or they grow, other vines will grow to get up to the sun. That's their strategy. But canopies, when it's in shade, it means that it's mostly in shade, but as the sun moves through the sky, they're getting light sometimes, and they're moving themselves around to get light. So shade does not mean pitch black, okay? Shade just means they're not getting sun all the time. Another thing to keep in mind with these numbers is when you talk about light, there's the intensity, which is the foot candle measurement, and there's duration. How many hours of the day is it getting that amount of foot candles? And you're not going to have an area in your house, if it's all natural light, that's getting 800 foot candles exactly all day long. That's not how it works. The sun moves through the sky, and you get varying levels. All that this means is if you're using this to keep track of your plants, you're trying to get them that amount of foot candles as many hours as possible throughout the day. Okay, so they don't have to be like that at 7 o'clock at night, it's okay, but just get them that as much as you can, okay? All right, let's move on. All right, water. Water, water, water. So water is the second most important thing that a plant needs, okay? And a lot of people, when they buy a plant on a care tag, you know, it says, well, you have to keep the water mostly moist, or you need to keep the water, you know, the top inch dry, or totally dry, or there's all these things. So when they water, people, especially people that kill their plants because they miss water, they think, I just water it every 3 days. I water it every 4 days. Well, we just kind of saw that if it's photosynthesizing at different rates, it's not going to be, there's no schedule that it waters on. It needs water when it needs water because it's photosynthesized and evaporated all the water that was in there. So when you water something, let's just talk about watering for a second before we get into the quality of your water. So the first thing you want to do is to get accustomed to watering. Okay, so let's see this guy. So already when I pick it up, it's pretty heavy, okay? So that already tells me that there's a lot of water in here. If you have a plant that you're not sure about how much water it needs, do something like a pothos. It's a really good plant to test with. You can let it dry out and it's very forgiving. Not totally dry, but very dry. Then what you're going to want to do is you're just going to want to pick it up and just see how heavy it is, okay? This is pretty heavy, so there's good water in here. But you'll know, when you pick it up, you let it dry out for a little bit and watch it so it didn't die, but it's dry. It'll be super light to pick up, okay? That's how you know it needs water. Now what you're going to do is you're going to water it, and when you water something, you need to water all the way around the plant. You can't just water in one spot, and then this part gets really wet, and this part's really dry. You need to soak the plant, okay? And you need to have drainage holes so that water comes out the bottom, okay? You want water to be pouring out of the bottom of this when you water it, okay? There's other ways to water we'll talk about, but we're just talking about general watering right now. So you want water to penetrate all the way through the pot on all sides of the plant, okay? Now when you do that, you're going to let it drip in a sink or whatever, and then you're going to pick it up, and you're going to feel how heavy it is, okay? And then you're going to know that this is what my plant feels like, and you will get better at this as it goes on. You'll pick it up and know right away if you do this a couple times. This plant needs water, this plant does not need water, okay? This is the best way. There are a couple other ways, and actually, if you're really nervous when you first start, we can use another tool. This is a soil tester, okay? This one does a couple things. It measures the soil moisture content, so if you get really nervous, and there are some plants that like to be dry at the top, and if you say, well, I can tell it's dry at the top, I just don't know how far down it goes, you can buy something like this and use this, and it'll tell you how moist the soil is that you can't feel. This one also reads pH, which is really cool, and it actually also reads foot candles, but I don't really trust this one, so I'm not going to use it for that. But I'll use that for pH, which is important for different nutrient stuff later. We'll talk about, and then moisture content if you're very nervous. But otherwise, just do this, okay? It's really good. Now, when you water, okay, so these are important to understand because a lot of people, so this is how it goes, okay? The first plant that they kill is because they forget to water it. The second plant that they kill is because they remembered that they forgot to water it, and then they water it way too much, and then it dies. Then the third plant, they get it pretty good. They either do that method or they're just on top of it and they get it right. And then it goes down for a different reason. Potentially one of these reasons, which is that their water is not, there's something in the water that's making the plant not good. pH is a big one, okay? So what's nice about these is when you have pH, so what pH is how acidic or basic a solution is, okay? So it's how many hydrogen ions are in a solution, okay? If you have just pure distilled water, it's just H2O molecules floating around, right? And if you were to add a tiny drop of hydrochloric acid, it would become, the pH would go way down, okay? It would drop way down, and that's gonna make some nutrients not available. It's gonna burn tissues, and it's really bad. Okay, so sometimes with water, there's other things in water, it's not just distilled water, but there are other things in water that will resist changes to pH, okay? So they have a high buffering capacity. So all that means is that they won't fluctuate all the time. Now, tap water is going to be usually pretty good at this, but I would still test your water, especially for cut flowers too. You have to test your water for cut flowers. But usually anywhere in the middle is fine, okay? There's some plants that do better with really more acidic stuff, but honestly, we're talking about green plants for your indoor stuff. Like, this is all very easy stuff. You just want to make sure the pH is somewhere in the middle, okay? Like 6.5, 7.5, up to 8 maybe, it's probably fine. Total dissolved salts, hardness, and alkalinity. Alkalinity is what we were just talking about. That's buffering capacity. That's how many, so basically when you have an acid, what you have is just hydrogen ions, H+ ions in water, okay? And why that's so dangerous and why it burns your hand is because they hate hydrogen hates being by itself, okay? So if you think of water, it's H2O, right? It's 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. They bond really well together, and they're very hard to break, and they dissolve a lot of things in them. That's why water is such an important molecule for life. When you have hydrogen ions floating around by themselves, they are looking for something to attach onto because they don't want to be alone. And if that thing that they are attaching onto is your hand, they'll just rip tissues apart because they're trying to get stuff to grab onto. That's why people get burned from it. So you want to make sure that your plant doesn't get ripped apart like that by having good pH and buffering capacity if you need to. Usually for this it's not a big deal, but for cut flowers it's much more important. There's also stuff in the soil. There's a lot going on in the soil, so that kind of acts as a buffering capacity, a buffering agent too. Hardness, if you have a lot of dissolved calcium and magnesium ions, that will build up in your water, and it'll build up in the soil when you water, and it could cause a lot of problems. So that's something to watch out for. You'll see like things here. The nutrient imbalance will be out. It could lock out potassium because it bonds to the same thing that potassium is trying to bond to in the roots. All that stuff. Total dissolved solids is everything that's kind of, all the fertilizers that you've used. So if you're fertilizing too often, you'll get a buildup of fertilizer in the soil, and it's a big problem. It could cause scaling, and it could do all kinds of bad things. Generally, pH is the most important, I would say, on here, unless you start to notice really weird things happening. Another thing with a lot of salts is you might see leaf tip burning. We'll talk about that later, but there's a lot of things that could cause that. That is one of them, is salts in the soil. Another thing too is other ways to water. So you could water from the bottom. You could put the plant in a saucer filled with water and let it soak up. A lot of plants actually prefer that, like an African violet does not like to be watered from the top because it's bad for the leaves. The only thing you have to keep in mind is there's nothing wrong with doing that. You want it to be a decent amount of water, okay, so that it sucks with capillary action all the way up the plants. You want to take it out, and you still want to drain everything. You do not want this sitting in water all the time just because it's easy. The other thing is standing water is really bad for growing bacteria, and you don't want bacteria near your roots if you can help it. So even when you do that, take this out and let it drain. And also when you water from the top, you start to flush stuff out the bottom. If you have fertilized water that you're watering from the bottom and it soaks up, it's never flushing out. It's just staying in there, and you can run into these problems where you have too much fertilizer in the soil because it's never flushing out. So that could be a potential issue as well. And a really good way, if you know that that's your problem, like if you measure it with an EC meter, which I don't have, there are ways to measure that though. You can always take distilled water and just take distilled water and just run it through, and it'll just leach out extra salts because fertilizer is just salts. So that's an easy way to do it. All right. Whoa. Did I go too far? No, okay. All right, growing media. All right, so now we're going to talk about soil structure. So let's see. This is probably soil. This is probably not soil. And what I mean by that, what this is growing in, obviously this is pothos. But this is a mix that a grower made to specifically be good at growing plants. Soil is only stuff that comes from outside, okay? So if it didn't come from outside, if you're mixing perlite and you're mixing all these materials, that's not soil, but it's fine. People call it that all the time. But I just had to put that out there. All right. So what does soil do for your plants? Okay, number one thing is it holds it in place. It gives it support. That's obviously important, right? Next thing it does is it holds on to water. So when you water it, it has water. It can suck up when it needs it, right? It also gets rid of water. It doesn't have too much water. So this is why you start to get these custom blends. We need, perlite will help us drain more, but, organic material will help us retain more. So it's this balance of trying to do all that kind of stuff. Aeration. The reason you get root rot is because plants still need oxygen. So if you think about photosynthesis, they take carbon dioxide and they take water with sunlight, and then they make glucose and they make oxygen. They need the glucose to grow. It's their energy source. They also need the oxygen to grow. So they need CO2 and they need oxygen. And they use it for cellular respiration to get energy. And so there needs to be a way that oxygen can get to the roots. Also, if it's not oxygenated, bacteria can grow there and destroy the roots and limit their ability to absorb nutrients, okay? They hold nutrients, right? So if you fertilize, it stays in there for a little while. It gives you some time, so that's important for their ability to do that. And they regulate the temperature and the moisture and pH, like we talked about. They keep everything kind of nice, a good soil should. Okay, and then they provide healthy microbial activity, which is also good. There's different microbes in the soil that will make different nutrients available and kind of help the plant. They have this symbiotic relationship where they help each other. Some plants will produce food for them, in the roots to encourage them to grow, and then they will come and free up nutrients for the plant. So pretty cool, especially in nature. All right, soil issues and soil oceans. All right, so these are main problems you can have with soil, okay? Number one is compaction, all right? Like we just said, so you need air to be getting into here, okay? You need water to be getting in and getting out of here. So what happens is, like this is pretty compact. Different plants have different requirements. This is pretty compact, but it's a fern, so I'm actually okay with that because ferns need to have a lot of water. But when you're watering a plant and you start to notice weird things, well, first of all, you could just see it at the top. You see it looks smushed. The soil looks smushed, and when you water, it doesn't soak right into wherever the water hit. It runs off to the side and soaks down the side. It can't be too compact. If you get things that are too compact like that, you need to repot them or the plant is probably going to die, okay? There's no room for air to get in there, so you're going to get root rot. There's no way for water to evenly keep everything moist, so repot that. Another thing you could do is aerate your plants. You should probably be doing this a decent amount of time, especially when they get crusty. And plants that like to have the top dried out, but like they dry out a little bit, you don't want them to get dry, and then you rewater. Those can get really crusty at the top and compact because as the roots suck in water, they suck in everything else around them, but they just take the water. So everything gets sucked in over time and compact. So you can take a chopstick, any blunt item, and just kind of, you're not really poking holes in it, you're kind of loosening things up, making channels for water to come through, but you want to kind of tend to the soil if you notice that this is obviously compact. Okay, that'll also, you won't have to repot it as often too if you do that frequently. But if it's really bad, repot it. Poor drainage, you should always be using drainage holes. I know some containers don't have drainage holes. I don't know what to tell you. I tell my customers to drill holes in them, but it's a good way to get a plant to die, is all I'm going to say, unless it's a cactus. So that's a big problem. Do that. You can aerate a little bit, or you can repot. Too little water, usually that's because you've used the wrong soil, not soil, growing media. So things like orchids like to drain really fast. So if you have something with a lot of bulk in it, like bark and things that orchids will use, and it's not holding on to water, and you have like a fern in that, it's not gonna, you need to use the right mix going into it. So if you see that that's happening, repot it into an appropriate mix. Usually just get the houseplant mix at the store and you'll be fine. Loss of aeration as it ages, same kind of thing. Your plant is going to break down the organic matter in here and all the other stuff, and as it does that, the particles are going to get smaller, they're going to clump together more, and you're going to run into a lot of the compaction issues, so that's why you want to repot it. Again, surface crusting and sealing, that's when you're going to use your chopstick and just break things up. And you want to use something blunt because you don't want to puncture the roots. You don't want to introduce bacteria into the root. That could be bad. So use something blunt, kind of be gentle, but still move soil around and get in there and kind of make some room. Hydrophobic media, I don't know, if you're mixing something that doesn't like water, I don't know, probably a bad idea. And then root binding. When the roots get too big and they circle around a pot and they crowd everything out, you usually need to repot it. That being said, peace lilies actually like being a little pot bound. So every time, there's a lot of general rules, but you always just do a little research on the specific plant. They like being pot bound. They feel a little safer that way. I'm not quite sure why, but they'll bloom better that way. So you want them to kind of get big for their pot. All right. Temperature is a really easy one. Okay? You shouldn't have to worry about the temperature. If you're comfortable, your plant is comfortable. You should not have to worry about, is it too cold for my plant? Is it too hot? I don't know. If you have to put on like 3 layers of clothes, it's probably too cold for your plant too. But otherwise, it's very normal temperature ranges. Okay, nutrients. All right. So in the 3 macronutrients that plants need are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, okay? So whenever you fertilize, don't get any weird fertilizer, don't do anything weird, you just want a equal parts NPK value, and they're always going to tell you, that's where it says 10-10-10, or 10-20-10, or all that stuff. You want it to be even, and you want to apply the fertilizer to their instructions on the back. Don't get funky with it. You could always go less than they tell you. I like to do that because I'll just do it more frequently. I just don't want to overdo it. Okay, so what does nitrogen do? Well, it's a major component of chlorophyll, so they need that to photosynthesize. Usually it's for stems and leaves and all the green stuff. That's what nitrogen is responsible for. It's going to make them grow vegetatively. if there's a lot, and they'll forego flowering. If they have too much nitrogen, they'll put leaves out all over the place. Okay, you can tell if you don't have enough because they'll start to lose the greenness. Now, obviously, these two plants, this plant and this plant are different levels of green, and that's fine. This is normal for this, and this is normal for this. You just want to see, is this plant less green than it normally is when it looks healthy, okay? Phosphorus is the P in the NPK. Phosphorus is important for energy transfer, for ADP, which is adenosine biphosphate and triphosphate. That's the energy molecule that all of us living things use, and phosphate needs phosphorus. So it's just good for roots, for strong establishment, for energy in the electron transport chain, and fruiting and seeding and stuff like that. Deficiencies would just be it's growing slow, the roots are kind of spindly and weak, and you might get, the easiest way is a lot of times you'll get that purple foliage. If you see like purple foliage, not on a purple passion like on a pothos, then, and it's really dark, it's probably phosphorus. And then potassium. So it just helps with water and enzymes, disease resistance, kind of just overall durability, and quality of fruit and stuff, and stress tolerance is a big one. So you might see weak stems, poor stress tolerance, or scorching leaf edges, okay? All right. So this is just the TLDR here. Nitrogen is leaves and stems. Phosphorus is roots, flowers, and energy. And potassium is strength, regulation, and durability, okay? It shouldn't really matter too much. You're just gonna kind of want to see when that plant needs to eat and how fast it's growing. And you're just gonna apply an even level of all these according to the instructions on the container, or slightly less. All right, there are a lot of other nutrients that plant uses. You shouldn't have to worry about them. Again, if you get a well-balanced fertilizer, you just apply it when you know you need to apply it, and everything will be cool. But I thought it would be useful to look at these because sometimes you see weird things on a plant. The ones I'd like to point out specifically are that magnesium one. Magnesium is the central element in a chlorophyll molecule. It almost looks like a blood molecule where ours is iron in the center. It almost looks the same in a plant, which is really cool, except they have magnesium instead of iron. So you will start to see a yellowing of the plant, but you're not going to see it like nitrogen. Nitrogen is this kind of general paling. You'll see this, it's called intraveinal chlorosis. That's when the veins stay green, but everything in between the veins, which is what transports all the stuff to the plant, starts to get yellow. That's a big one, but again, you're not going to run into any of these if you are fertilizing with a normal fertilizer and fairly regularly. Other things this is why it's important to check your water. If you have a lot of iron in your water, or you have a lot of other dissolved salts or other things like that, you could run into some of these problems. Calcium is a big one for outdoor tomatoes is a good example, but other fruits and vegetables, they can get blossom rot and stuff like that, and they'll fall off. That's usually a calcium problem. But iron could be a big one. If you have a lot of iron in your water, you might, and look how similar that looks to nitrogen. You might think, oh, it's just nitrogen, and you give it a bunch more nitrogen, and it's like, wrong. Like, no. So if you knew that you have a lot of iron in your water, you could kind of foresee this. All right, humidity. Humidity is a big one too. So, and this is probably where most people probably stumble when they think they're doing everything right and something's going wrong. It's probably humidity is my guess, or soil. Okay, so you can measure humidity with a hydrometer is what it's called. And I did not bring mine, but you can actually get a thermal hydrometer, which measures the relative humidity in the air, and it measures the temperature. It's kind of cool just to have them as one thing. So what it measures is the relative humidity, okay? So all that the relative humidity is the actual moisture in the air divided by the maximum that the air could possibly hold times 100 to get a percent. Okay, so warmer air holds more water than colder air, okay? It's because there's more energy, stuff is moving around, and it's just moving around more. You could think of it as it gets colder, things settle down into a liquid from a vapor into a liquid. That's kind of what's going on. So what that means is that if you had the same amount of water in the air, and it's a warm room versus a cold room, the cold room is going to feel way more humid than the hot room, even though there's the same exact amount of water kind of in the room, moisture. Okay, so what that means is if you have a humidity problem, you can just lower the temperature a little bit and the humidity will go up in the room with the same amount. You don't need to have a humidifier. I would get a humidifier. Okay, let's talk about this. Get one of those cool mist humidifiers, okay, that I have in my bedroom, and just run it on your plants. A lot of people say, put a pebble tray underneath your plants to raise the humidity. Don't do that. Well, who said oh? Oh, oh, I do that all the time. Okay, let's preface this. Let's think about it for a second. You can do that. You could do it. But the one thing I don't like about it is, A, we're talking about a floral shop situation. So like, okay, think about how many pebble trays I would need right here. This is ridiculous. Like, I'm not gonna go and pebble tray everything. That's absurd. I'd lose the business just on the pebble expense alone. So, so first of all, you wanna make the whole area humid, okay? So don't putz around like that. The other thing that I don't like about it is standing water, which is just not good. Standing water breeds bacteria, okay? So just don't do it. Like, you forget to put more water in your pebble trays, and then, no, don't do that. Just buy a humidifier. It'll save you a lot of hassle. Yeah, that's another tool you should have in your shop if you want to keep plants healthy, because they could get leaf tip burn from humidity. Let me just check my time, 1:42, okay. So again, some care tags might say it needs low humidity, average, moderate, high. Okay, so when you get a hydrometer, it's just going to tell you the percentage of moisture that's in the air, right, that it can hold at that temperature. So instead of using things like this, you get a hydrometer and it tells you, okay, like, what's my humidity in my room? Oh, that's why, like, this plant looks like garbage, because it's like less than 35% and it should be around 50 or 60, you know? So just getting more accurate with your measurements is very simple to do, but that makes a huge difference. So, okay, guessing plant requirements. So let's say you come across a plant that you don't know what it needs, okay? You can tell kind of what a plant needs, not everything, but by what it looks like, okay? So let's go over here for a second and look at these jade. All right, so let's look at what this is. All right, if it has thick stems and thick leaves, okay, that means it probably holds water in there, which it does. All succulents, these Calendula, they're different levels of thickness, but they're still thick, so they're holding water in some capacity, okay? This Kalanchoe, holding water, okay? So what that tells you, if you've never seen that plant before, is it's holding water. Its natural environment is probably somewhere dry with little water, because it has to hold water. Okay, so you can think, okay, I don't want to water this every single, as soon as it's a little bit lighter, I put water in it. It's like you can let it dry out 100% a little bit. Next thing is if it has thin, broad leaves. Okay, so like this Monstera, Pothos, even that coffee plant. What it tells you is it grows underneath other plants. It has to grow big to collect a lot of sunlight, okay? So it's probably in an environment where it needs to do that, versus this, which doesn't really care how much sunlight it's getting. Obviously, it's like, I'll be fine with this spindly little thing. That's enough for me, because there's no competition. Like, there's nothing blocking this. So this grows in a forest underneath big trees, and it has to have big leaves so it can capture more sun, okay? So that means that you don't want it in your southern window, because it wants to be kind of covered. It doesn't want to be blasted all day long. And it's thin, it doesn't need to hold any water, so it probably is in a very humid environment, and it's getting a lot of moisture. So you'd probably want, if I'd never seen this before, I'd say it wants that 400 to 800 foot candle amount of light, and it should be kept evenly moist. I'm not going to let this dry out like a jade, because it's used to getting moisture all the time. All right, waxy or glossy leaves. This isn't always the case, but it's possible that there's this, they develop that to hold in moisture. The way plants lose moisture is by stomata on the bottom of their leaves. These are little holes that are on the bottom of all the leaves that you cannot see, no matter how hard you look. But there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them. That's how they get the CO2 for photosynthesis. It's called gas exchange. They exchange CO2 in the atmosphere for the oxygen that they create. And that is how they release moisture. So long story short, they evaporate from here, water, okay? What that does is it makes a little tiny gap where there once was a water molecule, and then all the water in the plant moves up to fill that gap, and now there's a little gap at the bottom of the root, and so the root sucks up water. And that's how water moves all the way through the plant, is by the evaporation. That's why when there's low humidity and there's not a lot of water, it's going to suck it up and it's going to shoot it into the air. Also, when it's hotter, remember, warm air holds more water, so it's going to suck out water. Water is always trying to go from a place of high concentration to a place of low concentration. So if there's no water in the air and there's a lot of water in the plant, the water is going to leave out of the plant to go into the air. So you would need to water this more often. Okay, so that's just how that works. So wax could prevent the evaporation. It could form a coating around it to prevent it from releasing that. Velvety leaves, they're kind of delicate, they're thin, so we know they probably want to be watered more. But if they're velvety, they probably don't want harsh sun all day. It's kind of almost like a mini shade curtain on them, and you can just tell they're delicate. This would be like, maiden hair fern or something that's like that. It probably doesn't want to get blasted all day long. Smaller leaves, like we talked about here, probably means drier conditions. and brighter sunlight. The two ones I always think of with this is rosemary and lavender. Both of those are native to like Greece, like Rocky Mountains, that gets sun all day long and is blistering hot. So remember, the plant has stomata on the bottom, and that's how they lose water. So if you want to lose less water, you just make a smaller leaf with less holes. And that's exactly what they do. They have small leaves, like rosemary is like needle-thin leaves, so they have less water loss. They're thicker, so you can tell that they are from an environment where they don't get a lot of moisture and they have to hold on to it. And also the reason that they smell nice and taste good and make oils is also to keep in water, because oil is hydrophobic. So if they cover it with oil, the water can't get through as easily. So those are all things that you could tell if you saw rosemary with never seeing it before, but you kind of knew, okay, it's thin, it's thick. Like you could start to identify what a plant might need if you've never seen it before. So large leaves, again, they're probably in a jungle. They're probably obscured by a lot of things. Fuzzy leaves, like this guy. There's a lot of ways you can tell that this plant's natural environment is in a dry place. It's thick. It has fuzzy leaves. So remember, the water evaporates. Well, when the water evaporates and it bumps into a little fuzzy thing, it grabs onto it and it holds onto it. And so as that happens, there's a lot of humidity right at the bottom of the leaf where the opening is that water escapes the plant. So now the water is like, well, there's enough water out there. I don't need to evaporate right now. We're good. So this is just for the plant to hold on to more water. So this plant not only is holding on to water, it's saying like, I don't want any water to leave, or when it does leave, I want it to leave as slowly as possible. So that's a sign of that. Trailing and climbing, like we talked about, they're trying to get to the sun, so they don't need to be blasted by sun all day long. They don't like that. They've never been used to that, so don't give that to them. Upright, rigid, you can think of a cactus, usually tells you it's a dry environment, but it's not conclusive or anything. And then aerial roots, like Phalaenopsis, most orchids, it tells you it's an epiphyte. An epiphyte is a plant that grows on another plant, like an orchid. And because of that, and because it has aerial roots, you know that it likes humidity because it's audacious enough to throw its roots into the air. And chunkier, medium, better draining, like that's why you'll see like the bark for Phalaenopsis, and higher airflow because they're in the air, it's fine. All right, browning of leaf tips. I thought this was important just to throw this into there because this is a really common problem that's pretty annoying, and there's actually a lot of reasons this could happen. So we'll just go through it. Low humidity. This plant is going to dry out starting from here, going all the way down. So if you see the tip is dry, it's possible that it's humidity. Inconsistent watering, again, very simple. It's going to dry out for a different reason, and it's going to be from the tip down. Salt buildup. If you have a lot of fertilizers, like you're bottom watering all the time, and you get a lot of buildup of fertilizers, all that salt will get transported through the plant, through the phloem, and then it can collect in the tips of leaves, which can cause them to brown. So another reason they might be brown. Same thing, over-fertilizing. Poor water quality. Again, fluoride, chlorine, excess minerals will do the same thing. They will go up and accumulate in the tips of foliage. These are just examples of plants that are pretty susceptible to that, you can tell. So if you have like a marginata, something like that, and you start to see the brown, like it's a very easy plant to take care of, and all of a sudden that's happening, that's probably a good indicator of this. Root stress, yeah, they're root bound, they're going to start dying back. Again, it could lead to the same problem. If they get temperature, you've probably all seen, when one of us wholesalers brings you something in the middle of winter, you've probably seen temperature stress before. It's a little different kind of brown. It's in a specific location usually, or it could be the whole thing. But, generally it's just like this. It looks different to me. It looks much darker than like a normal kind of burning. Too much direct sun could also burn. So I hope you're getting the point that there's a lot of different things that could cause that. So you just kind of want to go through the list, and I would start with humidity. Personally, I think that's probably the culprit for most of them. And then just be like, okay, do I fertilize too much? Is it getting blasted and it doesn't need that? Look at the roots. Like you should probably look at the roots of your plants a lot. What time is it, 1:51? Okay. I'm not going to do this. It's going to make a mess. But you could totally pull plants out of their pots and look at their roots, okay? And when you get plants from a wholesaler, if you have time to do this, I would first of all, definitely inspect all your plants and look at the roots if you can. I can kind of see roots here, but like you could really zhuzh this around and get it out and look, are my roots brown? Are they nice and healthy and white, and are they rotting? I would look at that stuff, and as much as I hate to say it, I would send it back. All right, let's move on. Pests. This is just a thing that, again, inspect your plants when you get them. If you see bugs on them, usually it's going to be probably fungus gnats you might see pop up eventually. maybe thrip, stuff like that. Again, like you can mechanically wash them off with water. Some horticultural or neem oil or things like that could suffocate them because they breathe through their bodies. So you spray them with oil and they can't breathe anymore. So that could help. If it's really bad, like if you get scale or mealybugs, just send the plant back. And as a wholesaler, if I sent you a plant that had scale all over it, I'd want to know because, first of all, and also isolate these from your other plants, but I want to isolate them from in my greenhouse, I want to isolate them from other stuff, and I want to call the person who gave them to me and be like, there's a big problem here. So it is very helpful for us to know if you get something like that. Okay. I just made a list of plants that are easy, plants that are medium, and then a couple examples of difficult plants. One thing you'll notice on here, okay, aloe, succulents, cacti, stuff that's forgiving with water is very forgiving as a plant. Things that need low light are very forgiving. ZZs are super easy, sago palms. These are just generally forgiving plants. And the good news is that this is the longest list, so plants are easy, people. All right. Medium plants. They're medium just because of the humidity or watering can be weird. Like, for example, African violet, you water from the bottom, otherwise you'll rot the top. Other things like that with humidity can get a little, a lot of ferns on here. If the humidity is off on a fern, it's not going to do too well. So mostly it's humidity here and watering. And these are examples of tricky plants. If you don't do things correctly for these, they're going to decline. The Alocasia African mask is a great example. Maidenhair fern is a good example. Might be surprising that croton is on there. Croton's on there not because it's a hard plant to take care of, but because it's a hard plant to keep this beautiful coloring on it. If you don't give it enough light and you don't water it enough, it will not retain this color and it'll revert again to something like this so it can photosynthesize better. So that's only why it's tricky. It's not tricky to keep alive. Other things, string of pearls, just watering problems. People think they need to water them all the time. Really high humidity stuff on here. That's kind of the thing. I put this on here because a lot of people ask for this. What plants are good for air purification? We don't have to go through this now, but anybody can have this if you want. Long story short with air purification is that plants can do a pretty good job of it. They remove benzene and formaldehyde from the air, which is produced by a lot of different things. Just if you're having really bad problems with air, don't go to plants first. You probably need an HVAC guy in there first. Like, it's not going to solve your problems, but it makes the place have nicer air and it will filter out some of that stuff. I did that twice. And safe for pets. So a lot of people ask me what's safe for my pet. There's not a lot, it's tough. But these are just some really good examples. Any Calathea, Neanthobella, African violets, Boston ferns, Phalaenopsis. It's tough, but these ones are the best ones to go with for sure. So you can have a copy of this list later or just Google it. All right, so now we'll just go through a couple. I started to make profiles of different plants just to go through, and this is kind of what also I would use for a customer. Remember, like, you have to learn your plants because they're going to ask you. You're going to be able to tell them like 2 or 3 things. Like, as they pick up the plant, be like, do this and this and this, and good luck, kind of thing. And what you tell them in that little exchange is going to make a big difference whether they succeed or not, and what they think of you as a person. Because they're going to blame you. They're not going to blame themselves. They're going to say, oh, this plant was terrible anyway. Like, I'm really good with plants. So let's go through this one. We'll start with an easy one. Light, doesn't matter. Water, who cares? Fertilize, whatever. And humidity is completely irrelevant. And the name rhymes with easy. So this plant is probably the single easiest plant you can get. Start with this if you're not comfortable with plants, even though it's really expensive, but start with this one. Okay, now real stuff. All right, peace lily. So for the light, about 200 to 800. That is what people would call low light to bright indirect light. It does not like to dry out. It likes to be evenly moist. Fertilizing is easy, do it monthly. Humidity, see, it needs above 50% humidity. So a lot of people tell me, in my shop, my peace lilies go down. I would be willing to bet that your humidity is low because it does well with low light. It's not the light. So one note about this plant is it will wilt and come back, okay? Schefflera, it needs a little brighter light, especially if you're going to keep that variegation there. It needs super bright light or it will revert to green. You want to let it dry out a little bit. And fertilize monthly. Humidity is a little more forgiving. And if you want to shape it, prune it. Philodendron, it can do well in lower light, but again, you want it to be up there. Let it dry out a little bit. Humidity is pretty easy. What time is it? Okay, 5 more minutes? All right. Fiddle leaf, so when you see this kind of stuff, this is really all it takes to keep this plant happy. That's it. As long as you know what those are, you know what your light level is, and you know that you're fertilizing it monthly, and you know what your humidity is, it's actually really easy to take care of these plants. So when a customer comes into you and you say, like, how do I take care of this plant? Like, you don't have to like memorize everything. Like I haven't memorized everything. There's so many plants out there and there's so many things, but especially for the big ones like peaceful, stuff that you're sending out the door all the time, you should know this, but this is all you need to know. Like, you know, if you, yeah, because they're not going to have light meters. But what you're going to tell them is like, buy a light meter, and then you're also going to tell them you should sell light meters, by the way. And then you could just tell them, hey, like an east or west window, right? Because you know it needs to get a certain amount, and let it dry out a little bit before. Teach them the weight test. You know, become their teacher. They'll trust you a lot if you become their teacher. And then humidity, tell them like it's got to be humid. Like, you know, measure it or just get a humidifier. It's fine. Okay, hate sudden changes. Pothos, again, very similar. What you'll notice is a lot of these are very similar. So if you don't know something about a plant, just put it in the 200 to 800 range, let it dry out for an inch, fertilize it monthly, and make sure you have some level of humidity. There's a lot that are very similar. So this is the TLDR. This is for a plant I didn't know anything about and I couldn't see. Somebody said, how do I take care of it? 200 to 800, let the top inch dry out, fertilize it monthly with a balance of those 1-1-1s, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and make sure the humidity is above 35%. If you can get it to 50%, that would be better. But that's pretty much every plant. Like, there's obviously differences in all this stuff, but if I had to just randomly guess what it needs, that would probably do okay. And yeah, obviously, you know, do that. So if there's any questions, we could talk whenever. I'll be here all weekend, but we only have like 5-10 minutes, so if anybody has any questions they've been dying to ask, otherwise we can always talk later too. Yes, Doug. One more time, sorry.
Hang on, Doug.
Okay.
I got the mic.
Tell me what your opinion is using polk on plants when you send them out to funerals.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Your spray, your leaf shine.
Oh, yeah, I would use leaf shine. So I like it. So what it is basically a carbon chain. It's basically gas. You know, it's just single-stranded carbon. It's not going to hurt the plants. It might turn people off because of its smell, but I don't see any problem with it. I know that, who makes this, Chrysler? I think Oasis or someone came out with a product that is like it's a different kind of product that doesn't use, like it uses chemicals, but it's like something like, it's not as bad as leaf shine. I don't have a problem with it personally, unless somebody, you knew that they were maybe like really delicate, like they get sick from, I don't know. I think it's more of a perception thing. It does not hurt the plant at all. That's the main thing. It does not hurt the plant at all. Yeah.
Oh, another question.
For the average person that has like bromeliads, will the pups rebloom?
They will. It's the bromeliad specifically will take time. It'll probably bloom like very long down the line. But the pups will bloom for sure. This guy will rebloom eventually too. It'll just take time. Anytime you have like a plant that makes little babies, they're ready to go. They just need to grow up and they will bloom. But I would cut this off and this will rebloom eventually. It might take a really long time. It needs light. The number one factor for a plant blooming is how much light it gets. If you have a very healthy plant that's not blooming, it needs more light. That's the number one thing. But yeah, pups should. Any baby plant should. Yeah.
Doug has another
Doug
question.
again.
Do you need a certain fertilizer to help it rebloom, or will it rebloom on its own?
No, you actually don't. So when we talked about the phosphorus level, that has the most effect on flowering, and so a lot of people get a boosted phosphorus fertilizer. That doesn't actually help them at all. All it does, the main thing is if you want them to flower, they need obviously to be fertilized, but they need sunlight more than anything else. The fertilizer, if you provide an even fertilizer to them, they'll bloom with no problem as long as they get enough sun. You don't need to boost the fertilizer. All right, anybody else? We should probably wrap up. If you have any questions, we can always talk later. So,
Two things.
Yeah.
You put someone to sleep because they really like your voice,
Good.
and she's over there.
Aww.
I
My
was just-
wife? No, my baby.
Well, I was thinking that. I was like, she probably recognizes that voice for this last hour. And two, I really feel like I just got a PhD in flower. I mean, it's right. Has anyone taken a plant class like
hope it
this that
wasn't
was
too
on
fast.
this level?
Thank you.